And when you go and speak at these events, and I've seen you speak, in front of a couple hundred people and, high performance people, that kind of thing, certain themes come up with these people, right? I mean, you're literally in real time drilling down to these people a lot of times and evaluating the surface versus what you think is down inside and what's really going on in the heart. What are these themes that you see over and over again? Or what are sometimes you think that the story people are telling themselves versus certain reality and relationships with certain things in the world? What are some of these common elements?
I think identity. I think a lot of people lose themselves in what they're doing. I think from a business standpoint, we talked about, athletes and sport and, with the film that you just did, Iron Mind, where you talked about, is this an addiction? These triathletes and everything else. And I'm not suggesting it all is or it all isn't, but on occasion it can be. And I think what we do is we lose who we are into what we do, and it becomes our identity, which is fine initially, and it's fine maybe in the middle of it. But it eventually runs out when you sell the business or the business is taken away from you or you retire from the business or whatever, is that at some level you're going to be challenged and it's going to be taken away from you. And then we start to struggle to find out who we are, because we basically lost all of ourselves in that. So that's number one, in no particular order. Number two is I often see people climbing a mountain towards success, whether it's a business or a multi-million-dollar business or whatever it happens to be. And they get to the top of the mountain and they're unsatisfied. And I think we've talked about this in the past, is they're successful, but they're not satisfied. And they wonder what's wrong. And then what they do is they look across the horizon, meaning life, and they go, oh, I just picked the wrong mountain. So when I climb that mountain, they pick the next endeavor and they go down and climb the next mountain. And it's another 5 or 6 years of their lives. They climb that mountain and the same pattern happens. But they've never stopped to ask themselves a couple of very simple fundamental questions. Is what is the pattern here that I'm unwilling to address? What am I not seeing? Am I doing these things for me, or am I doing them to impress somebody else, etc.? And the other area I see probably the greatest pain or disconnect is relationships. So many entrepreneurs and leaders that I meet and work with tell me that they have a great relationship with their wives or their husbands or their children. And it turns out that when we take the time to really explore that, it turns out that that's not the case. But they're telling themselves it is so they don't have to address the truth. But yet deep down, they know they're not as connected as they could be. So there's a couple.
Is that because it'll always be that way when they're spending so much of their time in their business? Or is it because they're not doing the things they need to do to make those relationships better?
The greatest gift that I get, the most rewarding work I do, is not when an entrepreneur says, oh, I now spend 2.4 hours a week based on my new app, more with my children playing with Lego. And I've monitored this for the last 6 months and I'm up 2.4 hours. It's when someone looks at me with conviction and emotion in their eyes and go, I've become the father I never imagined I could be. I'm connecting. It's not about, this is nothing to do with time. It can be about time, but rarely ever is. So, because entrepreneurs often think, oh, if I just spend more time at home, if I turn off the laptop and I turn off the computer, that's a measure of how connected I am. I know many entrepreneurs that are on the golf course, but yet they're feeling guilty about not being in the office. They may as well be in the office. It's a complete waste of time. Or they're at home and I was going to say the BlackBerry, I would have aged myself, but the iPhone is off. But they're there and they're thinking. And I'm not saying there's no sin in thinking. It's just that they're finding it really hard to connect, but they've never learned how to connect. They've never been schooled in it. And I find that at the end, and the research is staggering of how many people go to their deathbed with major life regrets. And a lot of the regrets are around about the things that we didn't do as opposed to the things that we did. And a lot of it's about connection. In the end of the day, I think ultimately it all comes down to connection.